Hey, everybody. This is Atonuv Open Studio, episode 15. So, a little bit over 2 weeks on this. If you are just joining and wondering what's going on, this is a place where you can send your mix, your master, your demo, rough idea, and get feedback on your mix. What's happening with your compression? What's going on with your frequency spectrum? Maybe there's some arrangement stuff to work on during the mix. Maybe there's something that is wrong with your room or your listening environment. We can figure it out here. So if you have anything that you want me to take a look at, you can send it to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. And that link is in the description. And you can send those in anytime. And so far, I've got 2 tracks to look at today. So anything that comes in while I'm looking at those tracks, I will just keep on rolling and looking at them. And then once I get through everything, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. That way you can watch this at a later date and you'll know that you're just getting pure audio content. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to, give a little bit of time for some people to hop onto the stream. And so, just kill in like 3 minutes or so if you want to look at this in the future and skip ahead. Give it a few minutes. So I've got a couple of tracks from David. I'm going to go ahead and get those downloaded. And then another track from Snooze. So I'm stoked to take a look at those. Solid work from those folks every time. Yep, just downloading. And I'm just getting this stream shared around. All right, cool. And yeah, if you are joining in, like, comment, and subscribe. I'm here every night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and we've been getting a great response so far. And, the more that you share the link around, the more people we have sending in mixes, and then the more that we get to look at, a variety of different audio things. So I definitely appreciate that everyone has been sharing this link. It's been super cool. Keep on doing that, and we're going to keep on building this thing. All right, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to load in Snooze's track. So let's take a look at Snooze's email. Okay. You feel like you need to use a de-esser a little bit better. I'll go ahead and listen to that and see if we can dial in what needs to happen there. The beat is not yours, just vocals. So I'm going to go ahead and mute the stream because I've gotten dinged a couple of times with YouTube copyright when I've done like someone else's beat over vocals. So just for the sake of the grumpy robots, I'm going to go ahead and mute the stream, check out your track, and see what is going on. So we can all kind of play along in the silence, I'm going to go ahead and let Spectrum Analyzer run while it's playing so we have something to look at. Cool. All right. Muting. Okay, cool track. I really like the vocal production that you have going is really nice. You've got kind of a double tracked um, vocal going on, and then you've got that great like pitched down call and response thing happening that always sounds good. It's always effective, and it fills out the space nicely in this track. So you are rapping over a pre-made beat. So we have to kind of we kind of have to like master a finished beat to like get it so that it works. We have to have like a broad view of what's going on. So um it's a good beat. What it needs is like impact on the bass. And where that's going to happen is between 100 and 200, and you can see that there's a big old hole where that could live. So I would get a nice spicy EQ and just give it like 2 dB at 100, 150, 125, something like that, with a nice like wide bell. If you're going parametric, or if you're using an analog modeling EQ, then you will probably have a wide bell in that region. So, blow up that region a little bit, and then the entire mix is just a little bit dull. So you got to shine that up with some nice, like I would go with like a passive EQ. Like I would just go with a Pultec. That would be my go-to. Or you could do a gentle shelf, basically from 4K on up, and just like lift the entire mix. So it's going to feel a little more present, a little more in your face, a little bit brighter. This is like that boom bap lo-fi vibe. So I know that you don't want to blow up that region, but I would give it just a little bit more above 4K. It could really help it out. So that's all very good. Vocals sound good. It's mixed pretty well. I just think that you could address that 100 to 200 and above 4K region. Now, the file says that this is the master. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to look at loudness on this. I'm going to mute the stream again because I feel like you've got quite a bit of room that you could push this. So here we go. Muting. Yeah. So if you are mastering your own stuff, like, okay, so the thing is, you want to send this, you would send a track to get mastered by somebody else for a few reasons. First off, if they have like a lot of experience doing it, that is the most valuable thing. And, their ears, when you master stuff, you tune your ears to just hear like little teeny tiny moves. So you're sending it in for that. You're also sending it in for their listening environment, so that they're in like a 100% tuned space, so that they're going to make super just objective informed moves on your EQ curve. And you're also just sending it in for quality control, and like there's just a lot of numbers and figures to memorize about how to have a track hit and be at like standard loudness. So in short, this track could be a whole lot louder. And what you're going to want to do is set up your chain. Your mastering chain should be simple, 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 simple. We're talking about like a parametric EQ to fix stuff, a spicy EQ to get like a little bit of vibe, and then one compressor that's doing very, very little, and then a limiter, true peak limiter. And that should get you a good clean master in at least 80% of every single mastering situation. Sometimes you're going to need to DS. Sometimes you're going to need to do like 2 limiters, or maybe set up like a serial compression thing to just control the dynamics a little bit more. But most of the time, you could get away with a chain as simple as that. So I left my loudness meter up so that we could kind of see what was going on while the stream was muted. And I just saw the question in the chat, why would one use only light compression on the bus? I will totally get to that. So where we're at on this master is you're hanging around like negative 15 RMS. And you are hitting like negative 6 on your peak. So that's just like crazy quiet. You could hit a limiter and have it peak out at minus 0.1, and then you're going to want to get your RMS, your average loudness, your perceived loudness, up to negative 9 to negative 8. So if you have a loudness plugin, or like any DAW has like a clip meter and an RMS meter, it's generally like another, like you're going to see like the clipping peak, and then you're going to see a second meter that's usually RMS. You can look at your DAW's settings and take a look at it. But in short, those are the numbers that you're going to want to look for on that loudness. So great track. I want you to look at your bass. You got to, get a little more presence from 1 to 200, and then look at brightening this thing up, and then you got to dial in the loudness on this. So great track. Thanks for sending it in. I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. Okay, so if you are watching on another place and you can't see the chat, so Scarholm's wondering, why would you only use light compression on the bus? Doesn't it affect the attack of everything in a weird way? So that final little bit of like mastering compression is really just to, and sometimes you don't need it, but what you're gonna get is on most mixes, you're gonna gain a little bit of extra perceived loudness by just squeezing everything together, 1 dB of gain reduction, like 1 dB. If it's crazy, you're going to push 2 dB. So super low ratio, like almost doing nothing. It's this final touch that's just going to squeeze out a little. It's just going to constrict the dynamic range, the teeniest bit. It's like an invisible compressor. You don't hear it. If you hear your compressor, if you hear your mastering compressor, no good. Like we don't want the attack affected. So we're talking about the lowest ratio possible, like 1.5 to 1, 2 to 1. It depends on the compressor that you have. Some of them, they only go down to 2 to 1. So, but we're looking at like 1.5 dB to 1, and then 1 dB, so on and so forth. Sorry, distracted by the chat. So, you're going to get that one little bit of tightening, and then you're going to use, like a lot of the times, like with like an analog compressor or an analog modeled compressor in your DAW, you're going to turn up the makeup gain to get the final loudness because it sounds good on, like, they've built those gain knobs to sound good. So we're hitting that. And yeah, so it's like invisible, barely perceptible compression. Okay, and then doesn't that affect the LUFS? And we'll get lower with normalization. For Spotify, would you still notice the difference? Yeah, because everything is going to get, with normalization, it'll get standardized down to it is going to chop off the very edges. You'll still notice it, though, because the dynamic range has been restricted a little bit. And, we're talking about LUFS is perceived weighted loudness. I'm generally thinking in RMS, which is non-weighted, but I'm also looking at a frequency spectrum. I like to work that way because in my workflow, I balance out. I do frequency stuff, and then I go to loudness. And I know that if I'm hitting my frequency target, then my RMS is going to give me a nice, moment to moment. And I'll go into, the loudest part of the song and make sure that my RMS is dialed in. So it's kind of it's a way to get there. That last little squeeze is just to control it. And we don't do it 100% of the time. It's if the mix needs it. And most of the time it does. So with Spotify normalization, we first off, as listeners, we can turn that off. There's a setting. You can just turn off Spotify normalization. So there's a lot of talk about Spotify normalization, but it isn't like the be-all, end-all of mastering. So what you want to do is make a format agnostic master that will sound good on Spotify, on vinyl, on CD, on tape, on YouTube, on Waves, on Tidal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a perceived loudness, an RMS or LUFS value that will sound good. And first off, it sounds good. Even if you're not listening in a normalized environment like Spotify, the master will sound good. It's going through a whole bunch of... you're taking a lot of things into consideration to make something that sounds good, and that's what's important. Not, are you going to get 2 dB taken off via normalization on Spotify? That's not our concern. It's, does it sound good? Because if it sounds good, it'll sound good everywhere else. And there is a kind of a target loudness that'll sound good. And we like it, and people like it. If it's not loud enough, if it's not loud enough, if it's not perceived to be loud enough, then people are going to be like, sounds soft, sounds weak. If it's too loud, if it's too crushed up, then it'll sound claustrophobic and tight. So what I'm looking for is -9 RMS at the loudest parts of the piece. That's my personal target. It sounds good. So, any lossless format is going to be good. Wave, FLAC, so on and so forth. They'll all be good. They're lossless. What you put in is what you get out. And that's what we want. It's only going to matter once we start going into lossy files. So, good question. Yeah, as long as it's lossless, you're good. Okay, so what we... And then, okay, so normalization through Spotify is really not a problem, okay? What is a problem is when you put in a master that has severely restricted dynamic range, which is different from the peak value and the average loudness. LUFS, RMS, true peak. Those are one thing. Dynamic range is another thing. You can have something that's sitting at -9 RMS, but if in your mix you've put too much gain reduction on your kick, all of this adds up down the chain. Every single time that you do a big compression move, it's going to impact the overall dynamic range of your final master. So decisions made in the mix are going to affect the master. And that's the number one thing to know, is that your mastering engineer is only going to be working with your final mix. And the master is 100% determined by the mix. There's like no magic bullet fixes in mastering for a mix that doesn't quite add up. And sorry, just a few emails came in. So your dynamic range is going to be determined not just by the final mastering limiter or the final mastering compressor, but by the overall dynamic range of your final mix. And it even goes back to just individual elements within your mix, like especially something like the kick, because the kick is so, because it's one of, because it's going to be one of the loudest elements of your mix. It's going to be one of the defining, parts of the soup. If your kick is too compressed, you could have a final master that's at true peak -1 or -0.1. You could be at 14 lufs or -9 RMS. You could have a really, really balanced frequency spectrum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you were too heavy-handed on compressing your kick in the mix, you could be hitting all of those targets on the mastering end, but the dynamic range could be getting crushed to like -5. And that is a problem. And that is where Spotify and streaming services, they analyze the file. And if the dynamic range is super constricted, not the average loudness, not the true peaks, the dynamic range, if that has errors, then Spotify does an algorithmic thing that is destructive to your mix. And it just employs heavy-handed processing that will affect how the song sounds, which we don't want. We don't want it to sound different after we pass it through the aggregator. Like, we want to upload something and know that it'll sound the same. If we're like, within a certain true peak value or a certain RMS or LUFS value, and Spotify applies normalization and it just turns it down a little bit or turns it up, they do that too. If it's not loud enough, Spotify will normalize it up, which is different, But all that is changing, like, where you would put your volume knob. This is all for, the idea is that if you just put on a playlist and then every single song will be the same volume, you don't have to ride your volume knob as a user. So all it's going to do is make that final master, like, louder or quieter if those true peak or RMS values aren't on Spotify target. But if your dynamic range happens, they're going to apply weird compression, weird limiting, and it will sound different. Not just louder or softer. Something that could be taken care of by just, bumping up your volume knob. It will be different sonically. So then you've delivered a bad master because you want the master to be the same from platform to platform to platform. So, great question. Good stuff. I'm going to go ahead and open up the next track. So we, first off, okay, this is Atonuv Open Studio, the place where you can watch me talk about loudness all day, every day. If you have a track that you want me to take a listen to, final mix, final master, rough sketch, demo, absolutely anything, you can send it to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. I'm here every night at 6 p.m. Eastern. And I want to take this little opportunity to also point out there is a Patreon where you can toss a few bucks at the stream and get a shout out, or there's also like one-on-one coaching available. It's all in there. And one of the benefits is you get the daily Patreon shout out. So thank you, Demeter, Mason, and Tyler is new. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. All right, so let's take a look at David's stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and pop open this email. Okay, so you had a sketch yesterday. There's a newer version. It's kind of longer. That's great. So it's less of an intro. That's totally fine. You want to be able to get more info in the low mids without it clogging up the mix. Great question. Let's see. For rough mix, how do you go about mixing an 808, sub bass, and kick? Great question, because in a lot of like traditional stuff, we're really only working with bass and kick, but now we're adding a third element. So we just have to be, you even asked, is it a case of being more aggressive? Yeah, you got to be like very, very aggressive with your EQ when you're starting to add more than two elements. Like, you kind of have to be aggressive with your low end EQ after you add more than one element. Low end just eats up so much space and it can eat up your mix. So, you know, in a perfect world, a kick would just do everything we needed. But, you know, we need that melody and we need that float. So we put bass down there and then it's like, oh yeah, let's get an 808. Let's like, you know, shove this out. So let's go ahead. Let's take a listen to this track and I will keep all of that in mind. Good string sound. Okay. Super cool. Really cool to see it go from just an idea to a pretty like well thought out track. And I think the thing that I want to dial in and just concentrate on is, okay, where it is lacking is basically I listened to it and I was like, this feels empty. That is my feeling, like in the room. It's tuned, and then my thought is, and it's good to just associate. You want to have like words that accompany frequencies. And I've trained my ear that when I think it feels empty, that means that there is a lack of information in the mids. And that was my thought, feels empty. And then I loaded up the frequency graph, and it is scoopy at 500, which I don't know if you're calling that low mids. You were saying that you felt like you were clogging up low mids. 500 is your mids. That is your fundamental for a frequency, like, a violin A440. Like 300 to 1K, that's like the meat of your instruments. So you've got to get some fundamental you've basically got to pick, like, what is my lead? What is the thing that I want to drive the mix melody wise? And you got to dump 500 into it. Like a lot of, for like EDM, we want to be at least baseline flat in this region. That's all scooped out, like 500 especially, and then like 300 to 500. We want to aim for flat on like a rock track and even some electronic music. We might get a little bump, like right around here, right in that fundamental. It's warm that way. So that's where we're missing information. I'm not even worried about like this sub bass kick 808 problem because I'm like so worried about this. What I would do to so you got to pick. Okay, cool. Yeah. So this is mids. So this is like the most crucial part of your mix. And what you need to do is you need to pick like one element at a time to be really well represented between, let's see, we start to get between 250 and 700. So first off, like pick one thing at a time. Don't just try to like dump it into everybody, but like one instrument at a time from moment to moment in the mix. And my go-to would be a pull tech. So like the Waves Pugue Tech is a thing. I use the UAD stuff because I am a UAD nerd. But my go-to would be pull tech because you can just pull up 500 and just give it a boost on a given instrument and let it fill that space. So I would start with one instrument, and then after it gets like nicely brought out, you want to find one that sounds nice there. You're gonna have to go through your mix, and then start bringing mid-range information into like instrument by instrument. Maybe you don't want it to be centered on one instrument. Maybe you need to blend everybody, give somebody some love at 300. One of the reasons that I really, really like analog modeled EQs, not only do I just like how they sound, and I like that they introduce like a little bit of they introduce some character to the sound. They're also you have to use your ears because like 500, like on an actual desk, 500 doesn't mean 500 hertz on the dot. It could be 400. It might be boosting 475. It might be boosting 530, but it's about that region. And you start to associate regions instead of exact frequencies. Like if we're just used to just using a parametric to death, and it's like, oh, there's a ring at 672, and then you're making all of these like little tiny micro moves. But if you constrain yourself to doing a lot of your mixing on an analog style, you're going to mix faster, and you're going to be thinking in broader terms and making bigger moves faster and getting better mixes, bigger mixes faster. So, you know, I would pull up something like this and turn this peak way up between 7 and even 10. And on instrument by instrument, I'm going to go like, does it sound good at 200? Does it sound good at 300? I'm just going to click through my options. Does it sound good here? Does this sound good? Does this sound good? Et cetera, et cetera. Find that mid-range, because I know that my mix doesn't have the mids that it needs. So I'm just going to pick from like I don't have option paralysis at this point. Like, I'm not thinking about like, oh, which of the 20,000 frequencies am I thinking about? I'm thinking about 5. I'm thinking about 200, 300, 500, 700, and 1,000. And as you get used to using tools like this, you kind of know what's going to happen at each of these points. And then you can make a better guess about what you're going to do. So yeah, go through your melody instruments and basically do that. So big old peak. And then when you hear something that's just, that sounds good, like you found the soul of the instrument in the mids, then just back this off, because our ears are fooled by volume. Loud things sound good, but you're going to find it. Like, that's a nice way to work, just click through. Does it sound good? Does it sound good? Does it sound good? No. Oh, it sounds good at 700. Then back it off. So it's a fun way to work. That's a quick way to work. It's a good way to work. That is what I would do with your mix. And I'm just going to go ahead. That is my number one thing to say about the mix. So low end, I'm just going to take a quick listen. All right. So between the 808 and the sub bass, carve more aggressively around the. You basically have to. You have to think of it as like a frequency parfait. So you could put the kick in between the two. Layer the parfait however you want. Okay, I'm not gonna. This is like a total taste thing, but basically it needs to be like, and you could think in like octave terms. So like 20 to 40 hertz, that's gonna be sub bass, and then 40 to 60, so that's like half an octave, is gonna be kick. And then 60 to 100 or 60 to 90 is going to be bass, or the 808, what have you. And you're going to need to like hyper aggressively cut around those frequency points. It's like really close, but I think it needs more. I think it needs more of that, just like, this is where this lives, this is where this lives, this is where this lives. It's just a little bit undefined in that region. It sounds like you have the two other low end elements side chained to the kick. I would go one notch, like 1 degree pull that threshold down like one more notch or turn the ratio up one notch, just so we're getting the knock of the sub coming out a little more distinctly out of it. That's what I would do. And let's see how that goes. That might just be it. A little more aggressive on that EQ, maybe a little more sidechain both bass elements to the thing. And I have to check something outside really quick. I'm just going to come right back and get to that other track. Nope. I used to have a snack break sign. I'll be right back, y'all. All right. Great stuff. Let's go ahead and let's get into David's other track. Okay. Late night. So there's some notes on this track. Let me take another look. Okay, so this is basically a complete mix. It's supposed to have a vocal, and vocalist didn't come through, so it's a little empty here and there. Totally cool. Yep, you're maybe concerned about the high end. So, cool, let's take a look. solid, tight, sounds really good. I think the only thing that I would do, like the most major thing that I would move around, that sax is a bit harsh. So it's just a little too heavy, 1.5 to 3K. Like, just shave a little bit of that region off. And if so I would take it down there, and if it doesn't feel like it's on top of the mix, because obviously you want it on top of the mix, like I would say that that's what you're going for, but it's just a little, it's a little harsh when it hits. So um, shave it in that 1.5 to 3K range. If it isn't sitting on top of the mix after you do that, there are two places you could put it. 4K, and that's going to be a little just goose it like 1 dB there. You've got a hole from like 4 to 5K. So you could just put the sax there and it'll sit on top of the mix. And if you just gave it like 1 dB at 4K, I think it would sit on top. You're also, just in general, something I accidentally had my Pultec on at the beginning, and I was like, yeah, this is good. You're a little bare at that like 600, 500, 700 region in your mid range, and I would just find something that could sit there. Maybe it's the sax, and I'm talking like, once again, this is 1 dB. This is stuff that could be possibly like, if you were sending this to me to get mastered, I would tell you to shave the sax from 1.5 to 3K. That would be my note for you as like a mastering note. And then I would be able to make this happen. And these like, oh, maybe you could put it at 4K. Oh, maybe there's a hole at 600. These are like 1 dB moves, to the point where I would just do it in the master. I would just do a general juice like at 600 and at 4K. Like, it's that minor that I would be able to, like, quote unquote, fix it in the master. But since you're still mixing it, maybe you could address those regions now. It sounds really good. The high end, same deal. Like, you're maybe it's very nice and bright. Over 16K is, once again, we're talking about like one little bit of juice. And I would almost rather it be done in the master than in the mix, because you're just going to be able to get that, like, we want an overall bit of shine and gloss, as opposed to like, we don't necessarily want to just dump it to one individual thing, because then it's going to become too present in the mix, and your mix is already balanced. So, yeah, just lifting the entire mix with a little bit of top-end mastering EQ, I think, is the move. It could very well be the move. But, yeah, you're just a little lacking over 16K. And, over 16K is virtually imperceptible. So you're good. Yeah, really, really solid. Another really great track. I'm just going to listen again. Yeah, I love that kick and bass relationship. I love this mix. Really good tune. That keyboard part too, same thing. We're bordering on harsh. So maybe it was kind of like a war in your mix where you were just kind of like, it might have started with that, and then the sax needed to top it. So the sax is definitely harsh. That keyboard is like on the border. It could very well be perfectly good where it is, but consider it. Like once you smooth out that sax, maybe you're going to go back and go like, oh yeah, that keyboard is maybe a little hot too. So take that all into consideration and then move from there. So yeah, that's where I'm at on this. And yeah, if you ever get a vocalist to like fill out those little bit of those little dead spots, I think this is a solid banger, but it's good as is. If you can't get a singer to commit, just throw another lead over those parts and you're good to go. Solid track, y'all. All right. Those are all the tracks that I have in my inbox. So if you want to have something to listen to, you can send it to atonuvrecords@gmail.com. I will give this like 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go ahead and call it for the night. And snooze, you can check the replay. I got to you right at the beginning. So solid track today. Just a few things to look at on it. And yeah, go ahead and I will see everybody tomorrow. Keep on sharing this link. It's really awesome to have, regulars. It's always awesome to have new people. And y'all have been really great about that so far. So thank you. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call it a night, y'all. Have a good one.